Well, thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you, everybody. The war that we have been discussing has been carried forward as a military strategy, an economic strategy, and we've heard some reasons why both of those might be going astray. There is a third arm as well, which is a media strategy. The media strategy of the war has itself taken a considerable battering over the last few years, and I'm going to suggest to you that it's both necessary and appropriate and indeed eminently possible to take issue with it, to oppose the war on the basis of a media strategy and within that domain. And I'm going to suggest some ways in which it can be done and hopefully prompt a discussion among you about some initial ideas for taking that forward from this conference. So I just thought I'd begin by reviewing some of the cardinal images familiar to us as part of this media strategy. Another anniversary has just passed, the anniversary of this event, the famous or infamous toppling of Saddam Hussein's statue in Firda Square in Baghdad, which took place on April the 9th, 2003. And to be in a newsroom, as I was then, the newsroom of the BBC's 24-hour news service, was to be under strict orders from the high-ups that this event must take place live on the BBC. And so as a result, the BBC's camera was trained on this particular scene for hours on end, and everybody was on tenterhooks lest they take the risk of switching away from that view, even for a moment, and miss the crucial episode. And that issue of framing is important, because if you look at the extent of the frame there, the edges of the frame, it conceals at least as much as it reveals. Because, of course, later, pictures with a wider frame started to circulate and showed something really rather interesting. This is the same square at the same moment, and you can see that far from there being a throng of multitudes of Iraqis welcoming the US-led forces as liberators and celebrating this event, the square is actually rather empty. And that's not by accident, because, as you can probably see, at the entrances to the square from the major thoroughfares, there are US armoured vehicles holding back the crowds, lest any of them get in and offer a different response which might pollute the story. Indeed, the other picture, which we haven't got time to see, shows some detail of the supposedly spontaneous crowd response, and some people have compared the faces in that crowd with the faces of the goon squad which accompanied Ahmed Shalabi on his return to Iraq a week earlier, and those faces bear a striking resemblance to each other. So, a rent-a-crowd, devised for the media, designed to fit in to the media's known conventions, to what could be expected to be the media's response. Other images, of course, attained a rather less widespread currency. This one, for example, from the time when Saddam was our friend, and none other than Donald Rumsfeld went to greet him in 1983 as a special envoy from President Ronald Reagan. And does anyone know the answer to that question? What was the only program on US network television to show that image in the period leading up to the invasion? NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw? No. CBS News with Dan Rather? No. It was good old Oprah. Bless her. Bless her and save her. Bless her and save her. So there is a problem. Media constitutes a problem. It's what I call the war journalism problem, okay? You see there a visual representation of an important fact about US public opinion in the period leading up to the war, that as many as 66% of Americans believed Saddam Hussein was somehow responsible for the attacks of 9/11. And this was an impression deliberately crafted in the nods and winks and hints in a series of speeches widely reported by President Bush through the latter months of 2002, and of course enthusiastically reported by the media. And the problem was summed up by the editor's apology, published by the New York Times, information that was controversial then and seems questionable now, was insufficiently qualified or allowed to stand unchallenged. Articles based on dire claims tended to get prominent display. So that was the media strategy. The media strategy based on framing, not based on the sum total of what any of us might know about the situation, but based on a strategy to get us to bring certain facts to the front of our minds and keep others in the back of our minds. A framing strategy. And this was how it was working in the United States. But of course, this media strategy was also addressing an international audience, an audience across a putative coalition of the willing. And that's important because the circumstances when Americans favour the use of force are very particular circumstances. And in particular, Americans don't want, or they tell pollsters they don't want, America to be the world's policeman. This is why Bush appears here as a sheriff. It's the so-called posse provision. Sheriff Bush must be seen to be at the head of a posse of allies, allies to share the risk and the costs. So yes, even unto the Tongas, the Comoros Islands and the Dominican Republics, those allies are all part of the media strategy and the political strategy. And this is where the media strategy has been derailed, because the process, the endeavour, the enterprise of addressing an international audience with key propaganda constructs about the war has been unravelled. And those propaganda constructs have been unravelled more rapidly and more conspicuously than in any other comparable recent military adventure. It was a matter of weeks after the invasion that the world knew there never were any weapons of mass destruction. It was a matter of months after the invasion that the world knew that when the British Prime Minister Tony Blair was appearing to deliberate over a decision to join in the invasion, the promise to George Bush that Britain would be there, shoulder to shoulder with the United States, had been made months earlier.